Mm-hmm.
It's just you and me, Weiss.
Hello, Weiss.
Afternoon all. Who's calling?
Peter Herborn.
Ah, yes. Here we are. I'll wait another 2 minutes and then we'll start the session.
Right.
Any more in the waiting room, Fergus, or?
No, you're good to go, Weiss.
Good to go. Well, then here we go. Welcome all to the Raising Peace Festival in the week of the UN Day of Peace on the 21st of September. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where each of us is now. We acknowledge that the land was never ceded and that the First Nations peoples of this country, now called Australia, took care of the land, the flora and the fauna for centuries and held and still hold great knowledge and wisdom about the natural environment. I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. My name is Wies Schuringa and I am part of the Raising Peace Network. Welcome to the session called Miners and Missiles. Our main presenter is Elise West from the Medical Association for the Prevention of War based in Australia. Elise is the main author of the report Miners and Missiles. At about 4:45, I will introduce Christina Pagini, a secondary school teacher and member of the Italian Conservatory Against the Militarization of Schools and Universities. Christina is joining us from Italy. Yes, the Raising Peace Network is going international. The contact with Christina was made through Dragana Civantovic, who is part of the Raising Peace Network. Dragana is active in a number of peace organizations in Australia and also in Europe. This session is recorded. A YouTube video will be made and this session will live on our website raisingpeace.org.au. Can you put your questions and comments in the chat? And we will have time for Q&A later in this session. Can you please mute yourself to avoid background noise? Fergus is our tech host and he might also mute you. Elise, would you like to start?
Thank you, Weiss, and thanks to Raising Peace for having me along today. Greetings to everybody here. I'm on Wurundjeri Wurrung Bunurong country down here in Melbourne, in the south of Australia. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking with you today. I'm going to share my screen. All right, can I get a thumbs up? Can we see this? Very good, thank you. So Miners and Missiles is the title of a report that MAPW produced, well, 2 iterations in 2021 and again in 2022-23. I'm going to talk you through it today. We're also really lucky to have some guests from Italy who will be following on for me and who'll be reiterating the point that what we're talking about is really a global phenomenon. So I look forward to hearing from Christina about that. I'm going to introduce MAPW, Medical Association for Prevention of War, for those of you who don't know us. We have our origins in this bunch of fine fellows. This is the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, accepting their 1985 Nobel Peace Prize. Now, IPPNW, as they're called, we all seem to have very long names, did something really extraordinary in the 1980s, which was to unite physicians, US physicians and Russian physicians, around their common values as physicians, and on the basis that their obligations as doctors really overcame any of their differences, their national differences. And because the risks of nuclear war at that time were so high, they had an obligation to work together to address those risks. In the 1980s, the physicians appeared in a joint, unedited live broadcast from Moscow, discussing very openly the risks of nuclear war. And this was something really extraordinary. Gorbachev himself, when he reflected in a book he wrote later on, credited IPPNW with changing his thinking on nuclear weapons due to their rigorous evidence, but also their personal passion for the subject. This is MAPW today, looking a bit more cheerful. This photo was taken in Fremantle in 2021. This was to celebrate the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So MAPW was launched in Australia just over 40 years ago and has really continued to carry the mantle of the work for abolition of nuclear weapons. It's one of our core campaigns. And while we are medical people, we're not just doctors, we're nurses and allied health workers. We're people who work in hospitals, in hospital administration, we're social workers, and we're like-minded peace folks as well. We really continue to work from that basis of medical ethics as well, the principal one of which, of course, is to do no harm, but also to prevent harm. That's in our name, Medical Association for the Prevention of War. Here's a little bit more of what we've been up to lately. Of course, in the middle there, that's the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize, which was awarded to ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. This is really our proudest achievement. So MAPW and IPPNW launched ICAN way back when to pursue this kind of single mode of focus on the abolition of nuclear weapons. And because I'm often curious about what drives other people to involve themselves in peace work, I thought I would introduce myself and my reasons for getting involved. I was born in 1975, and around about the mid-80s, this is kind of what I thought my future would look like. Like millions of others, I was terrified of a nuclear war. That fear, I recall, was being really saturated the culture. And I remember really vividly turning to fiction, to children's young adult fiction, to kind of get information about nuclear warfare. This is how I sort of saw my future. I decided that in case of a nuclear bomb was dropped, I was going to get under the kitchen table and put a blanket over it and not emerge until I was covered in white fur, and then I would roam the tundra seeking my fellow mutants. Of course, I learned later on that that was not scientific, although the nuclear winter has been proven over and over again to be one of the most likely outcomes of even a limited use of nuclear weapons. I kind of forgot about nuclear weapons like a lot of other people. After that kind of peak fear, we seemed to think that the threat had gone away. But I stayed interested in the humanitarian effects of war and the enduring effects of war on people's lives. This is a photo of the work of the Guatemalan Forensic Anthropology Institute. In the 1990s, I was really lucky to spend some time with this Forensic Anthropology Institute. They were tasked with exhuming clandestine graves from that country's 30-year civil war. My job was to accompany them. So the human rights accompanier. I was working on my Spanish. I was kind of starting out on my career working in current affairs and documentary and so forth. But what I learned sort of with these people really stayed with me for a very long time. And one of the things that I learned there that sort of motivates me today is that I learned that for all the ways that war devastates, some people benefit from it. And then for some people find conflict preferable, beneficial, financially beneficial, politically. And I can't stand this. So this is one of the things that motivates me today, and that really drives me to continue focusing on industries like the weapons industry, which today is really the prime financial and economic beneficiary of conflict. So this is not new to anybody here, but I guess it's important to sort of state that we sort of see war as a social system. It's produced by people, by things that people do, by things that people think, by things that people don't do, and the things that people don't think about. It's an all-encompassing structure that really promotes and legitimizes violence at every level of human society. It has economic and social and cultural dimensions, and we're very clear that harm is caused even before the actual threshold of conflict occurs. So, you know, for the general population, we may sort of think about war as being extremely harmful when it starts happening, and all those victims of conflict, you know, the sort of ongoing effects after that. But we would argue that there is a great deal of harm that's caused even before we get to that point. So if war is a system, we also need to be working across the system. Our message, if we had a t-shirt, we don't have a t-shirt. If we had a t-shirt, it might look something like this, that peace is the best medicine. This kind of combines our focus on health and humanitarian impacts, medical values, and the idea that peace is really the underlying factor that enables human flourishing, good health, action on climate, progress and equity, and justice, and so forth. If I can, I'd like to show you what this looks like in practice. These are some snippets from some of our campaign work. So the Australian War Memorial, that's Australia's national war memorial for some time now. We've been working to kick the weapons companies out of the war memorial. For our Italian guests, essentially the National War Memorial takes money from weapons companies to commemorate the wars that weapons companies makes money from. It's quite a weird and unacceptable situation. So we have been working with various degrees of success on that issue for some time. Quick Nukes, the little pink logo in the corner, is our divestment campaign. So divestment is an important part of nuclear weapons abolition. It's about stigmatizing nuclear weapons and moving money away from investments in nuclear weapons. We work on the Australian trade in arms. Australia has a sort of baseless ambition to be a top 10 global weapons exporter. We've been working with partners to sort of highlight the lack of transparency and accountability that comes along with that trade in arms. That briefing paper in the middle there is our work on military greenhouse gas emissions. This is kind of an emerging issue and is not very well understood in Australia as yet. We sort of, following patterns in other militarised nations, defence is Australia's largest public sector emitter, yet Australia's greenhouse gas emissions that are generated by the Defence Forces are not counted and not counted as part of our national inventory as well. This is sort of known as the military greenhouse gas emissions gap. This is a whole sector of emissions that is not being addressed. And over in the corner there, this is work with some of our partners to address human rights issues, especially those that have arisen from Australia's participation in the war of Afghanistan. This is just a snapshot of all things that we do. I will move on now to the issue at hand, which is minors and missiles. So our work on the interference of weapons companies in education also kind of derived from our work for nuclear weapons abolition. We saw that companies that profit from the production of nuclear weapons seek to generate social license, and one of those ways is by their engagement with civil society and education and those sorts of things. In Australia, it was sort of well understood that the weapons industry was pretty well integrated into the tertiary education sector. And we decided to look a little bit further back down the line to see when this interference really started. So we started looking at primary and secondary education. This is kids from as young as 5 years old, to really see. And when we looked at them, we decided to look at this age group as well, because when we're talking about children, we actually are talking about people who are not yet able to consent to being influenced and don't yet have the critical abilities to understand what a particular company, what its core business may be. This is sort of personal for me as well. I'm a parent of 2 young kids. And during this time here, I'm going to talk you through what we've done, our strategy, and where we're heading. And I would be really grateful to hear from you at any point as well. So please put your questions in the chat. So this is an issue that's caught a lot of attention recently. In July this year, the Department of Defence announced a nuclear propulsion challenge, which was an educational challenge aimed at young people all around Australia. Now, this had a strong whiff of PR around it. A lot of the language sounded very, very slick. Not long before, the Australian Navy had contracted a professional organisation to help it address its recruitment issues. You notice here that some of the language, we've got a photo of a really cute kid who says that they would like to work on the subs one day, and notice the reference to high-tech defence toys, sort of really minimising what the eventual outcome of work on the submarine project comes to. Teachers and teacher unions around the country were really quick to respond. You'll see there in August, the Australian ran an article about individual teachers and individual branches of the Australian Education Union who resolved to boycott the program. Now, the program was optional. There was no need to participate if you didn't want to, but it was really excellent that unions made quite a bit of noise about this at the time. This wasn't really the first sort of AUKUS-related education program, and it won't necessarily be the last. Just out of interest, here's some of the content of the nuclear-powered submarine propulsion challenge. It quite clearly says that it's aiming to get kids interested in joining the Navy. All of the content and all of the education material is branded with the Navy logo. You'll see it references, some of those values like confidence and communication and teamwork. It all sounds very thrilling. This is the educational content, which I think if you sort of look at it, it's really nothing special. Any kid could look it up on the internet and come up with these answers. So there's not really a lot to it, which I think really emphasizes the point that it's really a brand association exercise. Not too long ago, at the beginning of September, we sort of see the pipeline getting connected up. So we had our AUKUS submarine challenge aimed at kids aged 10, and then later on in September, the federal government announced 4,000 new Commonwealth supported places. So these are places that students don't pay for, that the government pays the fees for, in STEM related subjects. So, and these were STEM subjects that was identified as being necessary for the submarine program. So we have the young kids who start now getting interested, and then they go into the university and they come out into the Defence Force. So we all see the dots all kind of connecting up. So again, this is not necessarily the first time this has happened, but this was kind of the first time that people had really reacted in very strong ways to this program. But in fact, Defence has been talking about something like this for quite some time. So this is May 2022. This is last year, where Vice Admiral Jonathan Meade uses the words, "my own sovereign and independent system," where I have a student and I tell her, you need to do some STEM subjects, you'll join our program, etc. I think the words sovereign and independent are really interesting there, because I'm not quite sure how the Navy gets its own sovereign and independent education system. But he's very clear on what the purpose about the Navy's involvement in education really is. But again, this is really just Defence doing what it said it would do. This is back in 2019, where they used the words influence many times to describe what their role in the national STEM agenda would be. Influence the STEM curriculum, influence national STEM programs. So this is really very, very deliberate and spelled out in their strategy. So what's driving this perceived need to influence curriculum and influence children is the calculation that the Australian Defence Force needs to grow its personnel. There seem to be a few different numbers turning up. People in the meeting might have some other information. But I've seen numbers that saying it has to grow by over 18,000 people over 2 decades. Now we know that young people's interest in joining the Defence Forces is on the wane, because they're not stupid. And the Defence Forces tried lots of different ways to attract children into the Defence Forces. They've used kind of advertising around, live your dream and self-fulfillment and, balance it with your other interests and so forth. But kids are just not very interested. And in fact, Defence has always struggled to meet its recruitment targets and retain personnel. That's been consistent over time. With the AUKUS arrangement, there has been suggestions that 20,000 or more workers will need to be added to sort of the industrial pool. This will be labourers, but it also will be scientists of various kinds. And there's also a data point. Again, there are different sort of numbers going around depending on what year and who's doing the tallying, that there may be an overall shortfall in Australia's STEM workforce of upwards of 140,000 people. This number comes from the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering from 2022. So this also, this sort of growing need for STEM talent is also set against the backdrop of ongoing decline and engagement and performance in STEM amongst Australian students. By that, it means less kids doing STEM subjects at higher levels, so later in high school and at tertiary level, and not doing as well, for example, against the OECD average. So over the past couple of years, there's been a decline in Australian student STEM performance against the OECD average. That seems to be an ongoing trend. Now, the Defence Department and the defence industry frame this sort of increased need for talent and a dwindling talent pool as a national security risk. They claim to be the sectors most at risk from this shift in young people's priorities. Another piece of context is an increased competition for tech talent overall. In our report, we have a quote from someone that says, why would you go and make weapons when you can go work for Apple and make cool stuff that everybody wants to play with? So there's an increasing demand for tech talent. And I guess when we say tech talent, what we're kind of talking about is innovation. The way that defence forces become more effective and more lethal, the way that weapons companies generate more profit is through innovation. Innovation is something that's really connected to people. So people become a really important industrial input, shall we say. All right, so everybody wants this kid's love and affection. Let's go back. Okay, so we started looking at this issue back in 2021. This was the first iteration of our report. We were really lucky to have Lisa Coulthard, who was a sociology student at Swinburne University, come and do placement with us for a semester. And at this stage, we were really just trying to, I guess, quantify the problem. In this report, mainly we list the programs that we found that were sponsored by weapons companies or had associations with weapons companies, and just started to look at the backdrop. So some of this stuff about what defence does and how they do it and what's all the strategies and so forth. In 2022, we went back to the issue to try and figure out what we could do about it and to understand a little bit more what were the underlying mechanisms and how could we communicate this to a broader audience to demonstrate that it was A, a problem, and B, a problem worth solving. We were lucky again to have some student input. Macquarie University sent us a team of students from a number of disciplines who did some great research for us, updating our list, but also looking into some of the sort of psychological factors around influence, around advertising, and so forth. And this enabled us to sort of generate a much more comprehensive report. So we wanted to explain, the context that I described before. I've crudely graphed here with some pies. I have non-scientifically here represented the increase in military spending over time. It used to be a little pie, now it's like a massive pie. It's basically the biggest pie around. Global military spending has risen every year since 2015. It exceeded $2 trillion in 2021. You may all be aware of this data point, but it's quite extraordinary. This is data from CIPRI. So our friends at the weapons companies, in order to get more slices of the pie, this is basically their business strategy: get more pie, get more pie, get more pie, get more pie. And as I was suggesting before, that innovation is really key to that. So influencing young children to have a positive view of the weapons industry is really what is in order to help them reach their business goals, is really what's underlying this increasing interference of weapons companies in primary and secondary education. There we go, it's coming. Nope. All right, so what does this look like? These are pictures of some really cool kids who really love science, who are having a great time making robots and doing competitions and building stuff with Lego and driving stuff around, and it's all totally fabulous. We don't suggest that in the programs that are sponsored by weapons companies that lethal technology is promoted, no one's shooting anybody, there's no tanks driving around, none of those things. What's really happening is positive brand association. So it might be a little bit hard to see where you are, but they're wearing T-shirts with weapons company brands on them. They're getting certificates of participation with weapons companies brand on them. There's a cool trophy there. It's made out of Lego and it's got a weapons company brand on it. Often the adults in the room will be volunteers from weapons companies. They'll be engineers who are volunteering their time to coach a bunch of kids to participate in a robotics competition, for example. So it's all about creating extremely positive experiences for kids. We really likened this to some of the tactics that are used by some of the other nasty industry around alcohol, junk food, sugar, tobacco, and so forth. These are sort of collectively understood as being stigmatized industries. These are industries that are prone to public disapproval and often use sort of complex tactics to create relationships with consumers in order to keep selling their products, which are inherently very harmful. This sort of gave us an idea about how we could prevent or make a little bit more problematic the association of weapons companies with schools. So we know that there's strong public support for limiting the extent to which harmful industries like junk food and alcohol and so forth can advertise to children, and that education departments and schools also take measures to protect kids from harmful influence. We thought that if we could make an argument that weapons companies belonged in the same basket as other nasty, harmful things, we might be able to make a bit of headway. So we had a look at education department policy across all of Australia's states and territories. This involved correspondence with ministers, for example, asking for their policies on sponsorship, looking at their policies for off-campus activities or learning materials, or anywhere where an external party or a third party might have some kind of policy provision put around it. This took a long time. This was sort of during COVID. Education departments were really under the pump. A lot was going on. So this was really slow work and involved a lot of back and forth with education departments. But at that time, this was the kind of the picture. You'll see red, no good, green, maybe. So we resolved to see if we could kind of shift education departments on these particular policies. And I'm just going to talk you through some of the arguments that we used. The first was we used a framing called the corporate determinants of health. This comes from, this is sort of a public health conception and was really well articulated in, I've put a link down there. Rob Moody, who some of you may know, he's on our board and is a very well-known professor of public health. They sort of came up with a really excellent piece of work which showed how there was this corporate playbook, so a set of tactics that harmful industries repeatedly used in order to promote their products. And I think that's a great quote there from the Public Health Association, which you can read for yourself because it's up on the screen. But so in our report, we looked at ways that weapons companies influence the policy environment, shaped education policies, captured civil society, aligned with charities, and used extensive supply chains to kind of spread out its influence. And by making parallels between the behaviour of other harmful industries and weapons industry, we think was really successful. The other argument that we used, which I think was also very powerful, was talking about brands and children, so children's exposure to branding. Again, we used well-established work, particularly around psychology and consumer science and things like that, that looked at how people form brand associations. Of course, children are very suggestible. They can be very attached to whatever's in front of them, whatever the best thing that happened that day was their new favourite thing. They lack the critical skills to really understand what was happening with advertising. They could also, even when they knew, say, a product was bad for them, they could also say that they preferred it and that they wanted it. Any parents around here probably, that won't come as a surprise. We learned that brands are really sticky when kids are exposed to them. So lifelong associations can be formed in childhood, even in spite of understanding that the brand itself may not do any good. There can be still quite strong emotional attachments to brands. We saw that weapons companies actively obscured their core business in their relationships with children and schools and other educational institutions. They focused on socially acceptable aspects of their business, like aerospace and robotics and coding. They really emphasised sort of emotional aspects of participation, as we saw before, like teamwork and commitment and those sorts of things. And they really emphasised diversity arguments, so being focused on women or increasing participation against those socioeconomic groups, for example. And in talking about brands and children, we also raised the issue of informed consent. So because the weapons companies often obscured their association with lethal technology, children were being associated and publicly associated with brands whose true meaning they could not possibly conceive of. So there are photographs around of young people smiling and standing in front of a Lockheed Martin brand, for example. Now, that child doesn't know that Lockheed Martin, is associated with alleged human rights abuses, has a terrible record of corporate conduct. And that child has probably also signed a consent form that has given Lockheed Martin the right to use those images across all media and in perpetuity. So we think this was a really powerful argument to people who had the power to change policy. I'm going to, okay. What we think is a great argument, but I think probably was less salient in our efforts to convince education departments to change their policy was about weapons industry and harm. We talked about the extent of civilian harm that's created by the weapons industry, about the really extreme impact on human rights and customary law. We talked about the opportunity costs of overinvestment in the weapons industry and in militarization more generally. We argued that the increase in militarization and the increase in spending in the weapons industry had no correlation whatsoever to human security, and in fact was a contributor to growing insecurity around the world. And we made arguments around these companies' association with illegal weapons, mainly nuclear weapons. So since the entry into force of the TPNW, we say that these are illegal weapons of mass destruction, and companies that produce and profit from illegal weapons really have no place in education. This argument sort of, I think, was probably less convincing, but we tried to address the argument that the defence industry creates jobs, that investment in the defence industry, has economic benefits, and we argued that there was significant underinvestment in other applications of technology that have a greater capacity to contribute to solving our big collective challenges. And this is what happened. So we've got 3 green spots on the map. I'm really pleased to say that Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland all changed policies as a result of advocacy. So in Victoria, the policy around teaching and learning materials was changed to say that learning materials produced by companies that make weapons are not appropriate in school. In New South Wales, industries associated with armaments and weapons were added to the list of tobacco, junk food, etc., and the same in Queensland. This was a really fantastic outcome. What happened, how this happened, we really don't know. I think policy is sometimes like a black box. You put your request in and then the policy comes out the other end, and we are not really sure how this happened. So we know that, education department policies have sort of rolling schedules of review. Often in correspondence, we were told, thank you for raising this. We'll look at this next time we review the policy. And then 9 months later, we get an email. Thanks very much. That's done. So thanks to whoever kind of made that happen within those education departments. We think that is a really extraordinary outcome. But obviously that's not the end of the story. The reason why we wanted to change education department policy was to use as a lever to essentially oblige STEM programs to end their associations with weapons companies. The argument is that in these 3 states at least, you have a compliance problem if you want to deliver programs that are branded by weapons companies in those states, and you have an underlying ethical issue because the purpose of the policy is to prevent harm. So the policy is telling you that these industries are harmful. Our next step is to go to programs and try and convince them that they need to change their behaviour. So as part of that, sorry, this is a bit slow. There we go. So as part of that, I'm sort of changing hats now and putting my pink hat on to talk to you about Teachers for Peace. Some of you may have already heard about Teachers for Peace. We are a new organisation, sort of really getting sort of started last year, but really just gathering strength this year. The purpose of Teachers for Peace is 100% to focus on the issue of weapons company interference in STEM education. We really just have one mission at the moment. We're laser focused on doing that, and to sort of continue this work of separating STEM programs from their weapons companies' money. I think the reason why it's been useful to sort of organise under this name is quite similar to the way that MAPW works, in the sense that we are organising around a set of values that are unimpeachable, really. Everybody values education, and everybody derives benefit from the values that underpin education. We say that there is an intrinsic link between education and peace. This is way back in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, that really tells us that education is purposeful when it comes to peace. On a practical level, you can't have education without peace, and you can't have peace without education, but there is a fundamental link between the two. We're building on a long and very proud history of educators working for peace in Australia. This is a quote from Sam Lewis, President of the New South Wales Teachers Federation in the 1950s, who was really clear about the effect of overinvestment in war, and who was a great advocate of the statement that every war is a war on children. Recently, UNESCO updated a 1975 recommendation on education and really restated it as being, education as being for peace again. So it's building on that principle that was in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and really reinforcing the link between the two things. I think it's really great, this UNESCO updated recommendation. It updates what our concept of peace is, which has come a long way since the 1970s, and also draws in some of our more contemporary concerns around equity, around race and justice and environment. Have a look at it if you haven't seen it lately. I think it's really, really great. So Teachers for Peace is taking this stuff and using it to kind of amp up the arguments that MAPW has kind of already made, and also highlighting the fact that teachers are really the key stakeholders in this issue. If teachers start to withdraw their participation in these programs, if they start to be critical, then these programs are really in trouble. So organising under this banner, we think, will really kind of turbocharge our advocacy on this issue. Now, as mentioned before, with the AUKUS agreement and the propulsion challenge, teachers and teacher unions were really quick off the mark to respond to that. And this year has actually seen a real, sorry, I want to go forward. This year has seen some really great action on the part of unions to restate and re-establish the role of education in peace. So early in the year, the New South Wales Teachers Federation at their national conference passed an excellent recommendation called On Peace, which really restated its commitment to work with the broader peace movement. It stated its opposition to militarization and to the AUKUS arrangement. This was really excellent. Please read it if you haven't seen it. Just recently, the Australian Education Union also passed a resolution along similar lines. The Australian Education Union, some of the Victorian branches, Maribyrnong, Inner City and Benalla, also passed excellent resolutions about the propulsion challenge, saying that they would not participate, but also making general statements about their role in building peace. And just last night, I heard that the Australian Education Union's South Australia branch also passed a resolution. And I am going to show you the text and give you a moment to read it because I think it's really awesome. It's coming. Nope. There. This is super punchy, no holds barred, absolutely clear, and I think a really fantastic step forward in our collective efforts to shift the dial on this issue. This means that we now have these 3 states with really powerful resolutions from teachers and education unions, and we'll be using this in our advocacy to programs to tell them that time's up, essentially. Onwards is where we're going. We're organising in various states. We're planning an organising meeting in Melbourne later this year. We've developed a program as well called Good Apples of STEM. Our logo is a little peace apple. What we want to do is add value to the idea of STEM education that has peaceful and positive applications. So we're going to recognise that programs that don't take money from weapons companies, but also this is a means of kind of stopping, maybe halting those programs from drifting towards involvement with weapons companies. I'm really happy to have guests from Italy here today because I think working internationally, this is a problem that we see in many parts of the world. So I think working together across borders would also be really fantastic. I'm going to leave it there. I'm not sure what the time is or whether I've talked for too long or not long enough. I'm going to pass back to you, Liz.
No, you did well there, Elise. You thought there was too much time. You didn't have enough information. I think you could have continued for some time. Thank you very much for that wealth of information. Absolutely great. I think we'd now like to hear from Christina Pagini from Italy. And Christina, if you can introduce yourself a bit more, but also what have you been doing in Italy about this? What is the situation? I've read the letter that Dragana forwarded, but yeah, what's going on in your workplace?
Yes, I mean, I'm Christina Pagini. I'm a secondary school teacher, and I'm a part of this association that was born just last year, and it's called Conservatory Against militarization in schools and universities, because we are truly concerned about, the growing presence of defense orientated weapon companies in school and the army as well. So thank you, Elise. I mean, you gave us a lot of very good ideas, and that was really, really nice. And there are a lot of things that are strictly connected with your culture and the way you organize your school system and so on. And I'm going to read because I don't have the confidence, to speak like that. But as you will see, there are things that also here in Italy, how we move is really connected how the laws, of our country works. So I'm going to start and share a presentation as well, if you don't mind. Yeah, let's see. Can you see it? Okay. Like that. Should be okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm here today to represent the Italian Conservatory Against the Militarization of Schools. And our association was born from strong concerns felt by a group of militant teachers within the grassroots union COBAS Scuola. It's like a trade union for teachers regarding worrisome international developments and the dissemination of war and defense culture by the military in the world of education, vocational training, and universities. These interferences did not occur until a few years ago, but are by no means a product of the current right-wing Italian government. These policies were also carried out by center-left governments and are now undergoing a worrying acceleration, in our opinion, due to the current international situation. And I'm referring to the Ukrainian war. I would say that our organization can be described in 3 main points. The first one is to oppose the presence of military personnel inside schools. Inside schools. To oppose what they proudly call the culture of defense, through which the military always present their role in the best light possible. In the citizen service, as holders of values such as homeland defense, courage, strength, sacrifice, all values well rooted in patriarchal cultures, of which armies are one of the expression. I would like to give some concrete examples to better understand what military invasive presence consists of. In Italy, since 2017, work experience is compulsory for every student in the final 3 years of secondary school. There are many cases in which students carry out the compulsory school work experience in collaboration with military forces. This entails visits to military bases, including NATO bases, or barracks. There is even some official agreement between the military defense and the Ministry of Education to this end. You can see here various member, of the civil society signing agreements with the special forces, and the last one was signed with the Navy. Marines, okay, American Marines from the U.S. NATO base of Sigonella in Sicily, regularly inviting schools of all levels and American military personnel take the place of teachers for teaching English, physical and nutritional education, computer science, history, geography, prevention of bullying and drug use. And this happened from preschool, to secondary school, to all levels, okay, of the education. The metropolitan city of Rome capital, which manages 6 training centers in the Lazio regions, has recently entered into an agreement with a company called Leonardo to launch a 3-year vocational education and training program with the aim of preventing school dropout. Leonardo is a large state-owned core partnership company involved in aerospace and military high-tech. Some subjects will be carried out directly by Leonardo personnel. This protocol is perfectly in line with the logic denounced by the observatory, namely the introduction of pervasive and consistent militaristic narrative in the areas of education and vocational training. The aim is to create manpower to be immediately employed in the production of weapons, a goal disguised by the prospect of finding easy employment at the conclusion of these 3 years training course. The second point we can use to describe our association is to gather all those peace associations, trade unions, researchers, journalists, in short, all different kinds of cultural sectors in the country involved in promoting peace, but specifically interested in this topic, I mean, military inside schools. Through the Centro Studi, Scuola Pubblica is a training institution organized by the Ministry of Education and is run by the union. We have organized from May 2022 seminars for schools personnel and students also in various provinces of Italy, entitled The School Laboratory of Peace, Managing Conflicts and Preventing War. And historians, researchers, pacifist associations from the Catholic world, such as Pax Christi, have collaborated with us as speakers from the beginning. And these conferences, very well attended, have allowed us to begin building a database of people and associations in tune with our contents. And from here, the proposal to establish a national observatory in an effort to reach different kinds of cultural sector in the country. The third point, okay, you can use, is that even if its name, observatory, suggests a passive action, it doesn't limit its activity in collecting information about military or defense industry presence within the school, but it offers to everybody tools and strategies to fight this intrusion. The majority of the observatory members work in schools or universities, and this is very important because at the moment, the most efficient way to fight, contain the war culture is to act from within the school. I'm going to give you some examples of pragmatic campaigns implemented by the observatory. The first one, a vademecum, is like a guidebook and has been sent to every Italian school. It's addressed to teachers, students, and parents, and it gives both a general view of the problem and specific information about what is happening in many schools and universities. We also suggest ways to organize themselves in order to be more effective in denouncing and opposing the presence of military in their school. Finally, the guide offers specific legal tools that can be used within the democratic bodies governing the school. Okay, this really is connected on how our schools, public school work. Okay, so it gives very specific, tools, legal tools to act against this. Another example, last month, we conducted a national campaign through the press and social media against the marketing of school bags and other school material advertised in the army. This campaign was successful because the toy company has withdrawn these gadgets from online shops and because it helped in raising awareness in the general public. And again, this reminds me how Elise was telling about associating, bad stuff with children, like bad food, bad toy for your child. Also, the observatory has recently launched a petition concerning university. With it, we asked 12 vice chancellors to step down from Midor board. Midor is the cultural foundation created by Leonardo, the biggest army company in Italy. We already talked about Leonardo. And we also ask these universities to stop any kind of partnership or research program with war-related business. We have a very busy press office and a website in which you can find our daily posts and updates. It is in Italian, obviously, but it also has an international page in which we publish news from abroad. And the last one is about Hungary, but the previous one was about Australia and the problem you mentioned about, submarine and schools and what you talk about this. School is a place for education and training where non-military culture is acceptable, but increasing resources are being spent on bringing citizens closer to the military because of a growing international tide of belligerence and militarism. They come to our schools because they want to recruit our boys and girls. Since the former war has changed, we are not facing an asymmetrical war for which highly specialized military personnel are needed. Nowadays, war is coming back to the ground, and there is need for large numbers, those we see dying every day in Ukraine. In Italy, a new law has been drafted, proposing large concessions to those who decide to undertake even a short military career and then stay on as reservists. This law will also include schooling, probably in the form of schooling credits. We have to stand between these policies and our kids. We are teachers of peace and defenders of our Italian constitution. The path is long, but we cannot afford to give up. We would like to help in the reconstruction of a great peace movement in Italy, but also internationally. And this can only succeed through young people, education, and culture. We invite you to embark on a path of non-violent, peaceful resistance and reaction, and to coordinate ourselves in order to try to become more and more numerous, stronger together. And here you can see, young children are, let play with, terrific tools, or brought in barracks and stay in a line and enjoy, the military life. And the last line is about our contacts, on Instagram, and Telegraph, YouTube, Facebook, and so on. Okay.
Thank you very much, Christina.
Thank you.
I wonder if, do you have any specific questions or comments about Elise's program? Is there anything that you would like to know more about what she presented?
I'm very interested about the 3 green dots. At some point, she showed a map with the green dots, and I would like to know how, that worked in practice. I couldn't hear very well. The voice is quite low, but it seems to me that you don't know exactly how that happened, right? Okay, I understood. But that is pretty interesting how 3 big regions like that, they, changed their policy and they took a stand, against this advancement of military in schools. So that it would be interesting, to know more about. And because as anything that is practical and that it has the potential to be implemented, in another reality, I think is very, very helpful. Yes. And yes.
Well, just in as I say, we made our arguments, and sometimes there was a bit of back and forth, and so we would refine the argument. And I think what's really effective with policy is the holding you to your own standards argument. So whenever we saw that policies indicated that the school or the department recognize a duty of care, for example, that's the language that we used. Whenever they used certain sorts of language, we fitted what we wanted to say into that language, and we were extremely helpful. We were saying, there's a gap in your policy, but look, we can help, just do this. So we were sort of trying to work within their mindset and their framework to make arguments that because clearly the person reading the letter has to convince someone else who has to convince someone else. And if we use language that's familiar to them and that is kind of common to their institution, we figured we may have more chance of success. But in terms of, how that happened, again, we don't know. We just sent the letters and waited, and then
Right.
out
Okay.
it came the other end.
Magic, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes works. Very nice.
We
I don't know
still-
if Christina wants to add something else.
Yeah, Christina?
Yeah, Christina.
The other Christina?
Oh, no. I think there are some questions from the other participants.
I just wondered if Elise wanted to ask Christina anything. Similarities, differences.
Yes, I liked your the guide that you sent to schools, and you mentioned that you gave concrete suggestions about how to organize. Can you give an example of just one of the things that you suggested?
Okay. There are legal tools mainly. That's the reason I told you that is specific for our system, our school work. In Italy, schools are mainly a democratic, works through democratic assemblies. Okay, of students, teachers, and parents. Okay, these three bodies, they participate in theory, okay, because obviously nowadays people is really not motivated to take part democratically to these deciding bodies. So the headmaster gradually take a lot of power, but the laws are there, just they are not used. So we suggest to, for instance, all the teachers in the school, they assembly 3-4 times a year, and everything that is connecting to teaching has to be approved by this board where all the teachers sit. Okay, so usually they go like they vote everything. They don't care. They vote everything that the headmaster, that teacher says. But they can decide not to. And also, even if the majority votes for something, you can option for to stand for a minority, and this minority has the same as a weight in the decisions, because in Italy teaching is free, so nobody can tell you what you can teach. Okay, so you can make aware people that there is another way, or they can stand for something else. Also, there are legal tools for parents, for instance. They can send, I don't know in English the word, a diffida, like a letter where they restrain their teacher to do something in the school where their child is. So they could say, as a school, as a parent, I don't want my son to be involved in anything that is military connected or related. And students themselves have their representative. They sit on the board of the school council, and also they have a weight. They vote there, so they can ask for these policies not to be implemented. So there are all the democratic bodies are there, and very often they are not used in proper way. So we suggest way that they can be effectively used within their school by all these three bodies: students, teachers, and parents. Also, we give out general information because a lot of people is not aware of this situation. They're not aware what the children do exactly in the schools, so it's to give them a more precise description of what's going on. Maybe not exactly in the school, but in the school, in the next city. And also because these are things that need to be fight before they happen, not after. So when there is a proposal that is presented to this board, needs to be fight there before it's approved. So it gives all these kind of suggestions or how to act and move.
We have several questions in the chat, and just looking at, it's interesting about Italy. Madonna asks, who's from Ballarat, do you leverage the Pope's strong stance against war and weapons production in your work? Or does the Pope kind of live in his Pope world and the rest of Italy weaponizes? What is happening in your relationship with the Vatican?
Okay, the thing is, for instance, in our association, it gathers other associations, that are connected with the peace, okay, but are also, as I said before, interested in specific problems. And one of the first associations that joined us was Pax Christi, okay, that is a Catholic organization. And at the moment in Italy, the Pope is, the only person that strongly speaks, against the war. That's quite sad, but it's true. I mean, all the other components, of our political landscape are left, right, center, doesn't matter. They are all in favor of sending arms to Ukraine and, this kind of policies. So it is a kind of reference, I mean, there is no other, no other figure so high that is speaking so openly against, this situation. So, yeah, we collaborate with Catholic organizations, and they are very active also locally. They organize public speeches, or they go on the street and manifest. I mean, they are quite active in this sense, and so it's almost impossible not to collaborate with them. Yes. So, yes.
Pax Christi is also active in Australia, but it's a small organization. And I don't have anybody from Pax Christi is online here. I know some of them, but I haven't seen them. Elise, the question came up about cadets in schools. The schools you talk about, are they the public schools or also the private schools? We have a system here in Australia of public schools, but an increasing number of about a quarter or a third of children now go to private schools. And some of these old established English schools have cadets. Can you comment on that, Elise?
I am not extremely well informed about cadets in Australian schools. It's part of the landscape, but in terms of it's a different kind of problem, and it's not necessarily one that we are addressing right now. I think cadets are, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody in the chat may have more information than me, but I think cadets are really much more a feature of private education, where military values are sort of given preeminence, maybe. But again, I think that kind of recruitment pathway it's a different problem. From the mechanism is different from what we've been working on with weapons companies and influence. This is just straight out recruitment. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have very much more to say about cadet program.
Yeah, and yeah, peace education in schools and non-violence education. Can you comment on that, Elise? Have you got a sense of what else is happening in schools?
I think peace education is really intrinsic in a lot of contemporary education in Australia, and it's really intrinsic in the way that schools deal with interpersonal situations in school. I know in my kids' class, non-violence is, and finding peaceful solutions to situations is, it's really, really common. I think we would love to see much more explicit peace education, something that really engages with our contemporary context and encourages criticism and analysis. I think part of the equation that's kind of missing, that's relevant to our work, is we often talk about who suffers when war happens, but we rarely consider who benefits. And that, the war as a system concept. Often young people report sort of history education goes, it was the 1920s, and then it was the 30s, and then it was the 40s, and then time went on, and is sort of unable to see sort of patterns or a bigger picture or systemic issues that sort of repeat and play themselves out and deliver benefits to certain sectors of society, to the detriment of others. And I know that educators for some time have, really tried to get peace education up as a concept. Teachers, like sort of way back before the Second World War, teachers were talking about it. In the 80s, there was a big push for it again. I think there are powerful interests that resist peace education in that really explicit way. We see sort of it rears its head every now and then. Not too long ago, there was a review of the Australian history curriculum, and there was concern from the government at the time that if students were taught to think critically about Australian history, they might be less willing to join up to the army to defend it. So I think that was kind of like saying the quiet part out loud about the attitude to education as well. I think governments tend to see it as a vehicle for producing, future members of our defence forces. Does that answer the question? I forgot what it was. Peace education.
Yeah.
Yes. More explicit peace education and critical peace education.
Is there peace education in Italy? Is that part of the curriculum, Christina? Is there kind of non-violent resolution of conflict or peace education? Does that come up in primary or high schools?
Yes. It depends on the school. Usually, there is a part of the curriculum that needs to be dedicated to civic education, and this very often is orientated, in this kind of direction. But it depends on the teacher. It depends on the school. So it's not, like a national policy to talk about these topics, specifically. Is more about to know your constitution, or to be connected with this agenda 2023, the European agenda for your young people. So it's not specific. There can be some peace program about how to interact one with each other, and to teach children the basics, or solving your conflict in a certain way. But this is more about civic, civil life, in general. So it's not about the war. When the Ukrainian war started, there were a lot of schools that worked on this, because people were quite scared here. And so there was, programs about teachers talking about Ukrainian war and this kind of stuff. Also because a lot of Ukrainian children came here in Italy as refugees. But not anymore. No. So I don't know, Christina, if you know about something more specific about this, but it doesn't seem to me to be, like a state problem.
It depends of schools, and there are many schools that decide to put in the program, in their general program, in the year, education of peace. But it's a decision of schools. as Christina said.
Elise, just a quick question for you. Is your focus against all military companies in schools or primarily those linked with nuclear weapons?
All of them.
All of them. Yeah. And also, Elise, is it within your capacity to engage with parents and citizens groups in Australian schools?
We would like, well, so is it within our capacity? Probably not exactly at this moment, but I certainly think we've been kind of making moves towards that way. So Teachers for Peace at the moment is me and Lil for, 2.5 days a week sort of thing. So capacity is always an issue. But yes, I think, parents associations are really powerful in this. Schools do have discretion. They can choose what they do. They can choose what they don't do. As you say, sometimes it's just information. People don't know that Lockheed Martin is, bad guy. They think Boeing makes aeroplanes. So we don't say that schools are doing the wrong thing, but that companies, use very sophisticated strategies to convince people that what they do is valuable.
Yeah. Hannah has put in the chat that there's a big Navy arms fair trade in Sydney in November from the 7th to the 9th. And there's movements afoot for demonstrations. And it's called the Indo-Pacific Expo, but it's at the International Convention Centre. It's going to be huge, like the trade fairs we had in Brisbane. And Raising Peace will also, perhaps not as an organization, but we've been in contact to talk about how we, can support the actions against such massive trade fairs that are very much supported by our government. They love them because the more military, the more trade, the better we all are for it. Very short-sighted view. There's a question from Yusuf about what would you replace cadets with? Is that kind of the best way to teach teenagers discipline? Cadets in our schools, Christina, it's more the private schools that have that, but that especially boys, but also girls, have a military uniform and they do beginners military exercises. I don't think they ever shoot live ammunition, but they might be taken to rifle ranges and to know what it's like to shoot. How do we? Are there other ways of teaching young people discipline apart from in a semi-military way? It's a bit of an
yes. There must be. I don't necessarily know that what cadets are learning is discipline is part of it, but it's actually about psychological bonding as well, and sort of overcoming that, I guess, objection to putting on a uniform and to, identifying with a group rather than as an individual. Like, as we all know, to serve in the military and to wield a weapon is essentially, requires a process of kind of overcoming some really deep-seated moral barriers. And I think, part of that, the over-identification with the group, even when the individual at risk is sort of part of that. I mean, again, I don't know terribly much about cadets, so I'm sorry if I'm not
I think,
but I'm not sure that, discipline might be part of it. But yes, I mean, there's plenty of ways to learn discipline without marching around.
And I think also pride in a uniform. I see some of these boys on public transport in their military uniform, and it's kind of the military walk. It is the pride in what you're doing. So I think they do the marching and the pride in the uniform, and again, it's creating a social license. Dale has put in the chat a link to a peace and Peace and Nonviolent Education. So that's an organization. Dale is in Melbourne. And so that's also a resource for us to go to. One of the difficulties is that the cadet programs are funded by the military. Jill, do you know more about this? I don't know how it is funded. Jill, would you like to say something more about this? Jill is part of Raising Peace and also part of Pax Christi and Pace Bene. Or Dale, would you know if these programs the cadets are funded through the military, or if there are teachers in the school that do it, or if actually people from the military come out?
It's an ADF program.
It's an ADF program, the cadets. Wow, yeah, another soft entry, but it's very traditional, I feel, in these private English schools. Hello, Jill.
Hi, I have family members over in the UK who are passionate about teaching kids outdoor skills such as camping and hiking and all those nice healthy things. And I said to them, well, why are you doing the cadet program? You know, surely you could do it some other way. And they said, no, the only reason that we are able to organize these kind of things and get funding for it is because we're doing it as cadets. And I suspect exactly the same thing happens here. Where do you get the funding from to teach kids these wonderful kind of organization? I don't think of it so much as discipline, as ways of working as a group to you know, for the benefit of the group. If you're doing a camping exercise, you can all work together. If you're doing a hike, you look after both the strongest and the weakest, etc., etc. And getting funding for this kind of thing is extremely difficult. I don't know where you'd get it from, but that's what, I mean, the government should be funding probably a non-violent civil defence force with the issues around this climate change coming up. We need to be as active in promoting this kind of thing as Elise and Christina are in making people aware of the fact that the military are in there trying to tell us that we need more weaponization to combat whatever.
Well, our time is almost up, and we've had a lovely, oh, that's my phone ringing, don't worry about it. We've had a lovely suggestion if Raising Peace can have a stall at the Navy Expo, at the Navy Trade Fair, so we will think about that. Yeah, I don't know if we will be let inside. Well, I'd like to think.
Right in, Reese.
Yes. Well, about 25 years ago, Quakers were allowed a stall indoors of a military trade fair in Canberra, and that went quite well. And apparently, as the story goes in Quaker circles, that the people they spoke to indoors, they said, oh, well, you know, it's really nice talking with you, and you're, you know, nice people, and we understand why you work for peace. You're much better than the rebel rousers outside. What they didn't realize is that the ones who were inside were also outside a lot of the time. So they didn't realize that nice people can also be demonstrators. So I'd like to thank the Christinas very much for coming in, and after our initial confusion about how you were going to participate, it's been really great to establish this international context and to know that we're working for the same thing and how similar your programs are. And also, yeah, what a global movement it is by the weapons companies. It's an enormous worry, but we're onto it. And people are working on it. So I'd like to go out on a positive note that we are not, you know, powerless against this move, that if around the world people are working together on this, things can be done. We can move this together. Yeah, so Elise as well, thank you very much. You were worried if we had enough, you know, 90 minutes, a long time. How are we going to fill the time? I think we could talk for another half hour and fill out time well. But I'd like to thank you very much for participating and making the preparations, making your PowerPoints. And I hope that our audience has stuck with us. That we can take this message to our circles, because it's not well known yet in Australia that this is happening. I was at an UN Peace Day event, multi-faith prayers for peace at Knox Grammar School on Thursday, a posh boys' high school. And I was sitting next to one of the teachers, and I brought this up. Did they know about this? And the teacher looked at me horrified. What? It was a music teacher, not because they had a choir, not in our school. This would not happen. Said, well, perhaps you need to ask some questions. What are the projects? What are the competitions? Where do the resources come from? And so, yes, that teacher was kind of shocked that this could happen in school. So I think it's for us to spread the words and to make our local members of parliament aware of this. And I will send them Miners and Missiles report to my local member of parliament and say, he's got primary school age children. Do you want your children to be educated in this way? So thank you again very much. And thank you to Fergus for being our tech host, and for our audience for taking the interest to listen to this and to participate on a Saturday afternoon. And I'm sure we'll meet again. This is not a finished story at all. And especially with our contacts in Italy. So thank you all very much, and I wish you all the best. We've got one more session to go in the Raising Peace event this year. That is tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock. You'll have multi-faith prayers for peace. It's organized by Religions for Peace, and they're based in Melbourne together with the Victorian Council of Churches. And they've organized a whole number of people who will have prayers, meditation, songs for peace. So hopefully that we'll get our inner peace so that we can go out into the world and work for peace. So good afternoon, all of you, and we'll have to say goodbye. And say goodbye to the Christinas.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
And,
Bye.
thank you for all.